Welcome, everyone. This week we've got an exciting show about a new launch from Fujifilm. Stop us if you've heard this before. But joining me today are Richard Butler
Hello.
and Abby Ferguson
Hello.
and Dale Baskin.
Hi.
And I'm Mitchell Clark. So, Richard, could you start by telling us what it is you're holding in your hands there?
Yeah, this is the Fujifilm X-T30 III. As the name implies, it's the third generation of what's now Fujifilm's least expensive X-T camera. So it's SLR shaped, but smaller than, say, the X-T5. There's a lot of external controls, but on a very small body. It's a fairly subtle update, to say the least, compared to the X-T30 Mark II. You get a film simulation dial, a couple of extra film simulations, the ability to save recipes to some of the positions on that dial, updated video specs, and updated autofocus. But other than that, it's very similar hardware, so it's still the 26 megapixel BSI CMOS sensor.
Though it is a new processor, right? It's sort of in line now with the rest of Fujifilm's fifth generation cameras, like the XM5, the X-T5, the X-T5, and so on.
Absolutely, yeah. Fujifilm say, we don't think in terms of generations, but most of the rest of the world does. So yeah, it uses the latest processor, which is where a lot of those capabilities come from. And as you say, it brings it into line with the XM5, which is essentially the same camera, but in a rangefinder shape without the viewfinder. And sitting below the X-T50, which has the higher megapixel sensor and image stabilization. And then there's the XS20, which has the same sensor and the same processor and image stabilization, but a more sort of Canon Rebel style control layout rather than the sort of dedicated shutter speed and no aperture ring on this. But yeah, so there are 4 entry-level cameras, and I intend to write what will probably be an incredibly complex article looking at what each offers.
You say this. That is a new lens as well that launched alongside the camera, and the kit lens for it.
Yeah, actually, I probably find the kit lens more interesting than the camera. The camera seems perfectly nice, but it's a lot of things we've seen before. Whereas this is a 13 to 33 millimeter f3.5 to 6.3 stabilized kit lens, which means it offers a 20 to 50 mil equivalent range, which is much wider than most cameras' kit lenses go. And so for anyone who's come from shooting with a smartphone, actually you may find the sort of 18 to 55 or classic sort of 28 or 24 mil equivalent kit lens to be quite restrictive. So this goes a little bit wider, and I've actually been rather enjoying that. I don't think of myself as enjoying shooting wide angle, but I keep using this and going, I can keep going wider. So.
I found that too, and even as someone who enjoys wide angle more, I do. It's not like super duper wide angle, but it is getting there to the point where you can really capture things that I think you would struggle to with a more traditional 24 equivalent lens.
Oh yeah, 20 millimeter equivalent is that counts as an ultra wide historically. So yeah, you say it's not super wide, kind of is.
So as with a lot of Fujifilm releases, there's been a lot of commentary around this camera. There was one article that one comment that I saw on our article, which was, gotta hand it to Fuji, new camera every 6 months or so, different yet incremental. And this seems to be a strategy that they've been employing. I think so far, out of all the major camera manufacturers, they've had the most models released this year by quite a fair bit.
Yeah, I think to an extent that's just where they are in the refresh cycle. But they do seem to be really offering, do you want the rangefinder shaped body? Do you want the SLR shaped body? Do you want sort of post 1980s DSLR style controls, or do you want slightly more retro dedicated dials? Do you want image stabilization? Do you not? There's kind of something for everyone. At the risk of cannibalizing their own sales, there's an awful lot of shared components, but they are really trying to sort of, I guess, flood the zone is the cliche everyone seems to have settled on.
Well, I think that brings up an important point. and that is price point, because while they have, different shapes and sizes and stuff, they also have a wide range of price points, especially now post tariffs, with the X-T5 being around $2,000. This camera starts at $1,000 without the kit lens, and then Richard, what is it, $1,200 with the kit lens?
$1,150 with the kit lens.
Yeah.
And I was you were talking about tariffs. As I was putting together the comparison table for the initial review, I noticed that actually that's a very, very similar price to the one that Nikon is asking for the Z52, and that Canon is expecting for its R10. So this is basically what a camera at this level costs now. There are a couple of cheaper models out there. There's the Canon R100 and R50. And you can buy, the rather older ZFC from Nikon or the Z30. But really, in terms of, cameras using the latest tech to a decent spec, this is about as low as things go.
And Abby, you are sort of most in contact with beginner and new photographers, people looking to get into the hobby and art form. Would you say that this is the type of camera that people are looking to get into, or are they still looking even further down market?
Price point, yes. This is definitely, I know a lot of beginners, even $1,000 is more than they're looking to spend, even though that's just, like Richard, you said, that's just kind of where we're at with the camera industry. $1,000 is just what you're going to have to do for an entry-level camera. I would say, in terms of controls and stuff like that, it is definitely something I would encourage beginners to have, because it is nice having some of those more manual dials on there, or physical dials on there. I think in general that's an accurate statement.
Well, Dale, you're sort of familiar with this XT sort of 10-digit series. Can you speak to sort of what the experience is like having those sort of physical exposure compensation and shutter speed dials is, and whether you prefer that in photography or whether you prefer sort of a more modern 2-dial approach?
Now, I actually like all the controls, and I think one of the neat things about the X-T10, 20, 30 series is that it gives you an awful lot of camera for a a very competitive price, actually. It doesn't have every bell and whistle, but it has a lot, and it has a lot of controls, and for someone who's looking to get in at a relatively entry-level point, have something they can grow and learn with, a lot of it's there, and having all of those controls is a great option. I think the downside, and Richard, you may have touched on this in your initial review, is it's a lot of controls in a relatively small space. And so it can make it challenging, particularly if you've got large hands, wearing gloves, all of the regular things that can get in the way of lots of controls in a small space. But if you want it, it's there, and it's a heck of an option.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the point I was about to make. I think there's a risk with this camera. It's got so many external controls that a beginner might just think, oh, that might be too much camera for me. I think once they actually learn what all the controls do, you may not find that to be the case. I'd much rather have a camera where I've got those controls. It's lovely to have, an autofocus joystick at this price. You've got the dedicated shutter speed dial, exposure comp dial, but you also have clickable command dials front and rear. I personally found that clickable front dial drives me absolutely mad, because I was trying to use the camera in aperture priority mode, and every time I went to turn it, I'd accidentally press it, and the next click I made would change the ISO. So I took a lot of shots with terrible, just crazy settings, and ended up having to customize that dial to only perform one function, because otherwise every time I tried to turn it quickly, I'd accidentally engage one of its other functions and change my settings, and it was infuriating. Likewise, Dale, you mentioned gloves, and you're absolutely right. It's just getting cold enough in Seattle now that I've had to dig mine out. I went out shooting with it the other evening, and without gloves on, where's the camera? Without gloves on, the Q button is just out of the way of my thumb. With gloves on, I just catch the edge of it, and so every time I turn the camera on, I find myself looking at the Q menu because I've accidentally caught it with my thumb. And again, I ended up disabling the Q button. I haven't got particularly big fingers, but it's a little bit of a handful. That said, it is lovely to have those controls, and you do have that level of customization. If you are finding this doesn't quite work the way I want it to, you can change it. But I did find myself really missing, sort of just that bit of extra space and that extra bit of build quality you get with the X-T5, but that is a much more expensive camera.
Dale, to your point of this being a very powerful camera, I actually did shoot a wedding with an X-T30 II. That is not something I would ever recommend someone doing. It was my sister's wedding, so, whether or not, if things had gone wrong, I guess we would have been fine. But I would say, there you are getting a lot of what makes the X-T50 and the X-T5 what it is, except for, of course, that higher resolution sensor and stabilization, which is interesting because that lens seems very video focused, like it's stabilized, so that's good for video, and it goes really wide, so for vlogging it's nice. But this camera has a lot of video features, but it's not really the best for it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, with respect to weddings, having shot a fair number of weddings myself, that's the one wedding you definitely don't want to screw up, as your sister's wedding. I mean, you never want to screw up a wedding for a client. That's the worst thing that can happen. But with any other client, at least you don't have to see them again. If it's your own sibling, you have to sit with them every single year at Thanksgiving dinner and get reminded of how you screwed up their wedding. So just putting that out there, I've heard more than a few horror stories from people who have experienced that.
Pro tips from Dale.
Yeah, exactly. But I think you're asking about video. Are you asking about video and the value of video on this? And I think it's actually pretty spectacular when you think about it. I mean, this is a camera that costs $999 in the US. I mean, first of all, any reasonable entry-level camera in the U.S. for under $1,000 is kind of a miracle at this point, particularly given the tariff situation. But at that price, you're getting a camera that does 6K open gate video with raw out recording, which, I mean, if you think about it, 5 years ago, any camera with raw video out 6K open gate recording would have been considered pretty darn impressive. And now it's in an entry-level camera. Does it have some things that would be nice to add? Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have image stabilization. That's always a really nice thing to have on video. Some of the connections aren't optimized. As I recall, it has a 2.5 millimeter audio plug instead of the normal 3.5, which always means you have to have a dongle, and you've got to have a USB-C cable to connect your headphones. So there's some workarounds that are required. But if you're looking to get a lot of camera for recording for a good price, I mean, it's a heck of a buy.
At the risk of disagreeing with you entirely, actually no, that's not entirely. But I just was quickly looking up how much more the XS20 costs, because in my head it's still the sort of I think $1,200 that it launched for, but I've just seen that they currently retail for $1,500. So it's 50% more expensive than this. Because on XS20 you do get stabilization, you get a 3.5mm mic socket, you get 3.5mm headphone socket. You get the ability to add the accessory fan unit to the back to extend record times. So as a video camera, the XS20 is a lot better. But yeah, I hadn't realised it was now 50% more expensive. The fact that this you have to use an adapter to plug in conventional headphones to conventional microphone to this. You have to use a USB to 3.5mm adapter to plug in headphones, but you can, which the EOS R10 doesn't have a headphone socket, so you can't monitor your audio. So the fact that it's not first and foremost a video model, but they have provided what you need to back up those capabilities. They haven't just gone, well, the processor and sensor can do 4K, so we may as well let you do it. To an extent, I'd actually argue the 26 megapixel chip in this camera is better at video than the 40 megapixel chip in some of their more expensive models. It won't capture video that's quite as detailed because it's not oversampling to the same extent, but it can read out faster, so you get less rolling shutter, and you still get to use it's got the Eterna film simulation, which is a lovely sort of flat profile that just looks really nice, and you can add a bit of contrast back to it if you want to. If you don't want to go the whole hog and start shooting log, or get yourself an external recorder and shoot RAW, which I'm not sure I'd recommend anyone do at this point. Buy a camera that shoots RAW internally, or shoot log and find that your workflow is a lot easier and your files aren't so enormous and your life is just better. But still.
Yeah, I would concur with your assessment. If you got the budget, the XS20, it's a better video camera, certainly. The thing that's just amazing to me is the fact that it even does these things at a sub $1,000 price point at this point in time. And one of the things I respect Fujifilm for here is, some companies do a lot of segmentation between products, and it would have been very easy for Fujifilm to approach this and say, this is the $1,000 entry-level camera. We don't need to include these features on this camera, but the hardware supports it. And then went ahead and did it. And I'm not sure that's the approach all camera companies would have taken on a product like this.
Well, so it's interesting that you mentioned that, and the XS20. There was a comment on the article being like, oh, how is it still impossible for camera makers to bring IBIS to the under $1,000 market? How much can that component cost? Now, I will say that we get this comment every time. Micro Four Thirds. There are cameras that have that for under $1,000, although no current ones. There's the Olympus EMD4, which they do technically still sell, but it still has the old name. That camera's been out for a while and hasn't been updated in quite some time.
You mean the OMD EM104?
That's it, yes. I can't believe I got it wrong.
No, you're absolutely right. So, and I think the thing to remember is, pricing is rarely about the bill of materials. It's not literally, this costs an extra, $5 to put in the camera, so we have to put up the price by $30 or whatever. To an extent, I think Dale's point is right. There's not particularly overt segmentation going on here. This has an awful lot of the capabilities of cameras higher up the range. It has an awful lot of the best capabilities that can be squeezed out of this sensor and processor. But at a certain point, if you put absolutely every possible feature in your cheapest camera, well, you don't sell any more expensive cameras, and that's not a great way of ensuring a company's survival. So it's, at a certain point, you do have to recognise we are essentially in a capitalist system and playing a game of Monopoly, and unfortunately, everything will always cost slightly more than you want to pay. But I don't think this is a particularly egregious example.
No. And I do think it is interesting, though, that basically every manufacturer of APS-C cameras has not done a stabilized under $1,000 camera yet. It may just be that it's too hard, or they're aiming for an entirely different market where they want smaller rather than sort of stabilized. But yeah, Nikon Z52 doesn't have it. Canon EOS R10 doesn't have it. Sony A6100 doesn't have it. It's just not par for the course.
Yeah, it's interesting that nobody's done it. Because I could, as you say, A6700, which is Sony's enthusiast model, EOS R7 enthusiast model. Nikon doesn't even do image stabilization in an APS-C camera, which is just
please. I want a new D500.
I don't think you're alone in that. I mean, for years before the D500 existed, people were saying, please make an update to the D300. They finally did, and it was lovely. That's a really good camera. I think you've got one, haven't you?
I used to. That was my first real camera.
Yeah, and it's a real camera. But now that we saw new APS-C lenses from Nikon last week, it would be lovely to see a proper enthusiast stabilized body. Hey, maybe with a new sensor. There's an idea. But yeah, it's just nice to see competition in this category, because it did for a while look as if everyone else had just given up and left it to Fujifilm.
Yeah, there was a comment, someone saying like, "I'm glad to see Fuji's commitment to their entry-level cameras. It may not be a world-shattering upgrade, but like the OM5 II, presumably, there's a commitment to keeping their products fresh with new internals and slight functional changes." I would argue the OM5 II doesn't really have new internals, but that's by the by. I mean,
no, I think that's a very astute comment. I think it's easy to look at this camera and go, "Oh, that's a really boring update," but it's not designed for people who already have an X-T30 II. It's designed to make sure that somebody new to the market or somebody upgrading from a much older camera arrives and finds, oh, Fujifilm does have something that's contemporary and competitive with the Z52, with the R10. It's a refresh. It says in the name, this is the X-T30 Mark III. It's not saying this is something radical and new. it's the third iteration of the X-T30.
Now, there was another comment, which I found quite funny, because it does mirror a lot of the other ones that I saw, which was, Fujifilm shooters. I love the film simulations. They're the reason I got Fujifilm. Fujifilm, here's a dial to help you access your favorite film simulations. Fujifilm shooters. No, I hate it. This is the fourth time we've seen that film simulation dial. I believe it premiered on the X-T50. We've seen it on the XM5 and the XE5 since then. Richard, could you go into what that is and sort of why it may be contentious?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have not got. There we go. I've not got a product focus mode on the camera I'm using, and I'm being told app is not focused. It's like no, it isn't. So yeah, there's a little film simulation dial on the top, which, as the name implies, lets you select between the camera's film simulations, the different color modes. It puts most of the sort of standard ones directly to hand, and then has 3 custom positions, which, like the XE5, can then be configured so you can add color chrome effect or more contrast or DR200 mode, or you can build a sort of selection of the other JPEG settings in what's become known as recipes, and you can assign a recipe to each of those custom positions. So you can not only use the color modes that are built in, which tend to be quite nice. They're not. I don't like them because they mimic some film stock. I shot a little bit of film as a teenager, but I'm not old enough to have spent half of my life shooting with Eterna or Velvia. But the color modes are quite subtle. The people liked Astia, they liked Provia, they liked this has got Reala Ace. It's got it's got a host of color modes named after film stocks. But the thing is that they're all quite nice, generally quite subtle color options that you might want to use. We're not back in the days where a camera offers standard or landscape, which makes all the greens really punchy, or portrait that makes the skin tones nice and then does who knows what. I don't think of I've never really used them because I don't think of I don't find myself thinking, oh yes, I really want this is a landscape photo, let's apply that. Whereas if I can sort of quite easily keep a track in my head of, oh yeah, if I use nostalgic neg, that will look like this. And you can apply them using the in-camera RAW conversion. So you can take a photo and go, oh, actually, would that have looked better in this film simulation? And you can apply them after the fact. So people who don't shoot Fujifilm often dismiss them as just being a gimmick. It's a gimmick I rather like, and putting them front and center, especially on an entry-level camera, so that you're encouraged, so that you remember every time you take a shot, oh, let's see what that one looks like. I think it's a really sensible thing to do. So I like the film simulation dial, and I'd be surprised if it will appear anywhere further up the range than the XE5, but who knows?
Superior is better than Kodak Gold. Don't at me.
I'm with you, Mitchell. I'm with you.
Well, Abby, I was going to ask, as sort of the DPReview staffer who shoots film regularly, is this a type of feature that appeals to you? I know you're not a Fujifilm shooter, but do you ever look at that and be like,
I have debated switching to Fujifilm because of that.
Wow.
I will say that, which people will probably come at me for that. But I've debated switching it because I really like the idea of having that. And I think, to go back to the beginner side of things, I think it really is a nice feature for beginners because they don't need to edit their photos to have them have a more polished look. And having that dial right there, instead of having to dig into menus to get to it, makes it one step easier. So I like it from a beginner standpoint as well.
I think people always say, like, oh, you should be editing your RAWs in Lightroom. And that discounts the fact that Lightroom's $10 a month. Like, that's $120 a year. It's not an insubstantial purchase for someone who's just getting started. There are free alternatives, but, just being able to get the picture that you want out of camera, there's something to that.
Yeah, and a lot of people, they don't want to sit down and edit things on the computer. They want to take their photos and then move on with their lives. And so having the option to do that, but still get photos that have nice colors and look like a more final product is a nice concept.
But I'm still trying to wrap my head around this concept that there's people that don't want to spend hours in the edit cave, like all alone with no social life, editing photos all night.
Somehow.
I feel seen and not in a good way.
I'm in this picture and I don't like it. That feels like a great conclusion to me. We're running up on time, so yeah. Although, with it being $1,000, that is like edging towards second camera territory. Why switch when you could have both?
Because then you also need both lenses.
Well, yeah, okay.
I was going to say, every additional mount you own is just another rabbit hole you can go down in terms of lens accumulation.
Yeah. We already have Sony and Nikon. I don't know if I need a third.
That might be enough. Be enough.
I have Canon, Fuji, and Micro Four Thirds floating around.
There you go.
Yeah.
Lots of great lenses for all of those.
There's lots of great lenses for all of them, and they don't work on each other's systems, which is obviously by design. But